Hey there, we're talking about what food was served at Wild West Saloons tonight. So, what are we waiting for? Let's dive into the story. In the dusty settlements that dotted the American frontier during the late 1800s, when the sun beat down mercilessly on wooden boardwalks, and the sound of spurs echoed through narrow streets lined with hastily constructed buildings, the local saloon stood as more than just a place to drink whiskey and play cards. For these establishments served as the social heart of countless communities where cowboys, miners, drifters, and townspeople gathered not only to quench their thirst, but also to satisfy their hunger with whatever food the establishment could manage to provide in an era when fresh ingredients were scarce. Transportation was difficult, and preservation techniques were limited to salt, smoke, and whatever cool storage could be improvised in cellars dug deep into the earth. The typical Wild West saloon operated under circumstances that would challenge even the most resourceful cook, with supplies arriving irregularly by wagon train or railroad. Depending on the location and the reliability of transportation routes that were often disrupted by weather, bandits, or mechanical failures that could leave a town isolated for weeks at a time, forcing saloon keepers to rely heavily on preserved foods, canned goods when they became available, and whatever local sources of fresh ingredients could be found or hunted in the surrounding countryside, creating a unique culinary culture that was part necessity, part innovation, and entirely shaped by the harsh realities of frontier life. The free lunch was perhaps the most famous food tradition associated with Wild West saloons, a practice that began in urban areas back east, but found new life and purpose on the frontier, where saloon owners discovered that offering food to their customers served multiple practical purposes beyond simple hospitality, as it encouraged patrons to drink more liquor while the salty foods increased their thirst, provided a reason for customers to linger longer in the establishment, and created a sense of community and value that helped establish customer loyalty in competitive markets, where multiple saloons might compete for the same clientele of thirsty cowboys and miners with limited disposable income. These free lunches typically consisted of simple but hearty fare that could be prepared in large quantities with minimal supervision, while the bartender attended to his primary duties of serving drinks and maintaining order, with the most common offerings being various types of preserved meats, particularly salt pork and bacon that could be kept for extended periods without refrigeration, along with beans that were both nutritious and filling. Hardtack or biscuits that provided substance and helped absorb the alcohol that patrons consumed, pickled vegetables that added flavor and prevented scurvy, and cheese when it was available, though the quality and variety of these offerings varied dramatically depending on the location of the saloon, the season of the year, and the business acumen of the proprietor. Salt pork was ubiquitous on saloon tables throughout the frontier, as it represented one of the most reliable sources of protein that could withstand the challenges of storage and transport without spoilage. And this fatty, preserved meat was typically prepared by frying it in large cast iron skillets until it was crispy and rendering out much of the fat, which was then used to cook beans or fry other foods, creating a practical cooking system where nothing went to waste and every ingredient served multiple purposes in the challenging economy of frontier food preparation. While the salt content of the pork naturally increased the patrons' desire for more beer and whiskey, supporting the saloon's primary business model. Beans were another staple of saloon cuisine, particularly navy beans, pinto beans, and black-eyed peas that could be purchased in bulk, stored indefinitely in dry conditions, and cooked in enormous pots that could feed dozens of hungry customers with minimal labor and attention. Though the preparation of these legumes required considerable advanced planning, as they needed to be soaked overnight, and then simmered for hours until they became tender enough to eat, often seasoned with whatever salt pork. Bacon grease, onions, or spices were available to add flavor to what might otherwise be a rather monotonous and bland dish. The bread served in Wild West saloons was typically hardtack or simple biscuits made from flour, water, and perhaps a bit of lard or butter if available, with hardtack being particularly common because it could be baked in large batches and stored for months without spoiling, though it was notoriously difficult to chew when dry and often needed to be soaked in coffee, beer, or water to make it palatable. While biscuits required more skill to prepare properly and used more expensive ingredients like butter or lard, making them something of a luxury that was not always available depending on the saloon's budget and the availability of fresh ingredients from distant suppliers. Pickled vegetables played an important role in saloon cuisine both for their flavor and their nutritional value, with pickled cucumbers, onions, and cabbage being the most common varieties, as these preserved foods helped prevent scurvy and other nutritional deficiency diseases, while adding acidic brightness to meals that might otherwise consist entirely of salty, fatty, preserved meats and starchy beans or bread. And the pickling process allowed vegetables to be preserved for extended periods without refrigeration, making them particularly valuable in remote locations where fresh produce was unavailable for months at a time during harsh winters or when supply wagons were delayed. Cheese was considered something of a delicacy in many frontier saloons, though when it was available, it was typically hard, aged varieties that could survive long transport and storage without refrigeration, with cheddar being particularly popular because of its keeping qualities and strong flavor that could stand up to the other robust tastes on the saloon table. Though the quality of cheese available on the frontier was often quite poor by modern standards, frequently being dry, cracked, or partially spoiled by the time it reached remote locations, yet still appreciated by customers who might not have tasted any dairy products in weeks or months. The cooking facilities in most Wild West saloons were extremely basic, typically consisting of a wood-burning stove or fireplace with perhaps a few cast iron pots and skillets, limiting the complexity of dishes that could be prepared and favoring simple cooking methods like boiling, frying, and roasting that required minimal equipment and attention, while the lack of reliable refrigeration meant that any fresh ingredients needed to be used quickly or preserved through salting, smoking, or pickling, creating a cuisine that was necessarily simple, but often quite flavorful due to the concentrated tastes of preserved and seasoned foods. Many saloons supplemented their free lunch offerings with more substantial meals that could be purchased separately, particularly hearty dishes like beef stew made from tough cuts of meat that were slowly simmered until tender, often with whatever vegetables were available such as potatoes, carrots, onions, and turnips, creating filling meals that could sustain working men through long days of physical labor while providing better nutrition than the simple preserved foods of the free lunch spread. Though these hot meals were typically more expensive and not always available depending on the saloon's resources and the cook's skill and ambition, fresh meat was a luxury in many frontier saloons, available primarily through local hunting or when supply wagons managed to deliver it before spoilage set in, with beef being the most prized when available, though it was often tough and stringy from cattle that had been driven long distances or worked hard as draft animals, requiring slow cooking methods and considerable seasoning to make it palatable, while game meats like venison, rabbit, and various birds provided welcome variety when local hunters were successful, though the availability of such protein sources was unpredictable and seasonal. The preparation of meals in saloon kitchens was typically the responsibility of whoever was available and willing to cook, whether that was the bartender during quiet periods, the saloon owner's wife if he was married, or occasionally a dedicated cook if the establishment was prosperous enough to employ specialized help. Though cooking skills varied widely, and many frontier cooks learned their trade through necessity and experimentation rather than formal training, leading to considerable variation in the quality and consistency of food served even within the same establishment from day to day. Vegetables other than those that could be pickled or preserved were generally scarce in frontier saloons, though some establishments attempted to maintain small gardens during favorable seasons, growing hardy crops like onions, potatoes, and cabbage that could survive in challenging conditions and provide some fresh nutrition to supplement the preserved foods that dominated most meals, while root vegetables like turnips and carrots could sometimes be stored in cool cellars for extended periods, providing welcome additions to stews and other cooked dishes during the winter months when fresh produce was otherwise unavailable. The spices and seasonings available in Wild West saloons were typically limited to salt, pepper, and whatever dried herbs could be obtained through trade or grown locally, with salt being particularly important not only for flavoring, but also for preserving meat and other perishable foods, while pepper was expensive and often used sparingly, and other spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, or exotic seasonings from distant lands were rare luxuries that might appear occasionally in more prosperous establishments or areas with better transportation connections to major supply centers. Coffee was virtually universal in Wild West saloons, serving as both a beverage and sometimes as an ingredient in cooking, with the strong, often bitter brew helping to cut through the richness of fatty foods, while providing much-needed caffeine to customers who might be working long hours in physically demanding occupations. And the coffee was typically prepared in large pots that simmered on the stove throughout the day, growing stronger and more concentrated as the hours passed, creating the legendary cowboy coffee that was thick enough to float a horseshoe and strong enough to wake the dead. The social aspects of eating in saloons were almost as important as the food itself, with the communal tables and shared dishes, creating opportunities for conversation, news sharing, and business dealings among patrons who might otherwise have little contact with each other in the isolated communities of the frontier. While the informal atmosphere allowed for the mixing of social classes that would have been unusual in more established eastern cities, as cowboys, merchants, miners, and professional men might all gather around the same table to share a meal and discuss the issues of the day. Seasonal variation significantly affected the food available in frontier saloons, with spring bringing the possibility of fresh greens and early vegetables from gardens, summer offering the best opportunities for fresh meat from successful hunting, and the arrival of supply wagons over passable roads, autumn providing harvest opportunities for those establishments with access to farming communities, and winter creating the most challenging period when preserved foods dominated entirely, and fresh ingredients were virtually impossible to obtain, except for the occasional successful hunt or carefully hoarded supplies. The quality of water used in cooking and drinking varied dramatically from location to location, with some frontier towns blessed with clear springs or wells that provided clean, tasty water, while others had to rely on muddy river water or alkaline well water that affected the taste of everything prepared with it, including coffee, stews, and even the washing of dishes and utensils, creating another variable that affected the overall dining experience in ways that modern diners might find difficult to appreciate. Many saloons attempted to provide at least some accommodation for the dietary preferences and needs of different customer groups, with Jewish merchants and customers sometimes being able to find foods that met their dietary requirements, Mexican and Native American patrons bringing their own culinary influences to bear on available ingredients, and European immigrants adapting traditional recipes to work with frontier ingredients and cooking methods, creating a gradual fusion of culinary traditions that reflected the diverse backgrounds of the people who populated the American West. The economics of saloon food service were carefully calculated by proprietors who needed to balance the cost of providing free lunches against the increased alcohol sales they generated, with successful saloon owners learning to prepare foods that were filling and flavorful enough to attract and retain customers, while using ingredients that were relatively inexpensive and could be obtained reliably, creating business models that depended as much on food service as on beverage sales for their overall profitability and long-term success. Preservation techniques used in saloon kitchens included not only the obvious methods of salting and smoking, but also more creative approaches like burying foods in cool earth, storing them in caves when available, or packing them in snow during winter months, with successful preservation being crucial to the survival of both the business and sometimes the entire community during periods when supply lines were interrupted by weather, conflict, or transportation failures that could isolate frontier towns for extended periods. The utensils and dishes used in frontier saloons were typically simple and durable, with tin plates, cups, and utensils being preferred over more fragile materials that might break during the rough handling that was inevitable in establishments serving hard-working men who might not always be gentle with the furnishings. While communal serving dishes and utensils were common both for economic reasons and because they encouraged the social atmosphere that was so important to the success of these establishments as community gathering places. Regional variations in saloon food reflected the different environmental conditions, cultural influences, and supply situations across the vast expanse of the American frontier, with saloons in cattle country featuring more beef dishes when available, mining camp establishments adapting to the specific needs and preferences of prospectors and miners, railroad town saloons benefiting from better access to shipped goods and supplies, and border establishments incorporating Mexican and Spanish culinary influences into their offerings, creating a diverse landscape of frontier cuisine that reflected the complex cultural mixing that characterized the westward expansion. Hunting and fishing supplemented the food supplies of many frontier saloons, with proprietors who were skilled outdoorsmen able to provide fresh game meat, fish, and sometimes wild plants and berries that added variety and nutrition to their offerings while reducing their dependence on expensive and unreliable commercial food supplies. Though success in these activities was never guaranteed and required time and skill that not all saloon operators possessed or could spare from their primary business responsibilities. The relationship between saloons and local ranchers, farmers, and food suppliers was crucial to maintaining adequate food supplies, with successful establishments cultivating relationships that ensured reliable access to fresh ingredients when available while also supporting the local economy and creating networks of mutual dependence that helped strengthen frontier communities and improve the survival chances of both individual businesses and entire settlements during difficult periods. Food safety and hygiene in frontier saloons was rudimentary by modern standards, with limited understanding of disease transmission and food-borne illness, though experienced cooks learned through trial and error to identify spoiled foods and developed practical techniques for maintaining food quality within the constraints of their environment. While the high alcohol content of many beverages may have provided some protection against waterborne diseases and helped preserve foods that were prepared with alcoholic ingredients, the preparation methods used in Wild West saloons were necessarily adapted to the limitations of frontier cooking, with most dishes requiring long, slow cooking times that allowed tough cuts of meat to become tender while maximizing the use of available fuel, which was often wood that had to be cut and hauled from sometimes distant sources, making efficiency in cooking not just a matter of convenience, but a crucial economic consideration that affected the profitability of the entire operation. And experienced saloon cooks became masters at timing multiple dishes to cook together, using the residual heat from fires, and stretching ingredients to feed as many customers as possible while still providing satisfying and nutritious meals. The famous trail drives that brought cattle from Texas to railroad towns in Kansas, Nebraska, and other northern destinations created seasonal booms in saloon business and dramatically affected the food culture of these establishments. as hundreds of cowboys would arrive in town with months of pay burning holes in their pockets and a desperate hunger for foods other than the beans, hardtack, and occasional beef that had sustained them on the long journey north, leading to temporary periods when saloons would stock up on special ingredients and hire additional cooks to handle the influx of customers who were eager to spend money on better food and stronger drink after months of deprivation on the trail. The chuck wagon, while not technically part of saloon culture, influenced frontier food preparation in important ways, as many cooks who worked in saloons had previously served as trail cooks or had learned their techniques from men who had experience cooking for large groups under challenging conditions, bringing with them knowledge of how to prepare filling, nutritious meals using portable equipment and preserved ingredients, along with recipes and techniques that had been tested in the demanding environment of the cattle trails, where feeding hungry cowboys was essential to the success of the entire operation. Wild game played a significant role in saloon cuisine when available, with deer, elk, antelope, rabbits, prairie chickens, and other native species providing welcome variety to the otherwise limited protein sources available on the frontier. Though hunting success was unpredictable and seasonal, and the preparation of game meats required different techniques than those used for domestic animals, as wild meat was often leaner and could become tough and dry if not cooked properly, leading to the development of specialized recipes and cooking methods that maximized the flavor and tenderness of these valuable protein sources. The gradual introduction of canned foods revolutionized frontier saloon cuisine in ways that would have seemed miraculous to earlier generations of proprietors who had struggled with constant food spoilage and unpredictable supply chains, as the development of reliable canning techniques and the expansion of railroad networks made it possible for even remote establishments to stock their shelves with preserved fruits, vegetables, and meats that retained much of their nutritional value and flavor, while lasting for months or even years without refrigeration. Though the cost of these manufactured foods meant they were often reserved for special occasions, or offered as premium menu items that commanded higher prices than the traditional fare of salt pork, beans, and hardtack that had sustained frontier communities during the earliest years of Western expansion. The social dynamics of communal eating in frontier saloons created unique opportunities for information exchange and business networking that were particularly valuable in isolated communities, where formal institutions for commerce and communication were often non-existent, with the shared tables and informal atmosphere allowing miners to discuss promising claims with potential investors, cowboys to learn about job opportunities at distant ranches, merchants to identify new markets for their goods, and settlers to gather information about land availability and farming conditions, making the saloon dining room into an unofficial chamber of commerce where economic opportunities and practical knowledge were exchanged along with food and drink. Cooking techniques adapted to frontier conditions often involved methods that would seem primitive or even dangerous by modern standards, with open fires being used for most cooking, despite the obvious risk of accidents in buildings constructed largely of wood and often inadequately ventilated. while the lack of reliable temperature control meant that cooks had to develop intuitive skills for judging when foods were properly prepared, leading to a generation of frontier cooks who could assess the doneness of meat by touch, judge the temperature of ovens by holding their hands inside for specific lengths of time, and manage multiple dishes simultaneously while tending bar or performing other duties that were essential to the operation of these multi-purpose establishments. The influence of Native American food traditions on frontier saloon cuisine was more significant than is often recognized, with indigenous peoples having developed sophisticated techniques for food preservation, preparation, and nutrition that proved invaluable to European settlers who were struggling to adapt to unfamiliar environments and climatic conditions, including methods for drying meat into jerky, preparing nutritious dishes from native plants and animals, and creating portable foods that could sustain travelers over long distances, though the integration of these traditions was often informal and unacknowledged due to the complex and often hostile relationships between white settler and indigenous populations. The economics of food service in frontier saloons required careful balance between the costs of ingredients and preparation against the revenue generated by increased alcohol sales and customer retention, with successful operators learning to calculate the optimal amount and quality of food that would attract and hold customers without creating losses that could threaten the viability of the entire business, leading to the development of standardized portions, careful inventory management, and strategic menu planning that maximized profit margins while still providing sufficient value to keep customers satisfied and willing to return for future visits. Seasonal variations in food availability created natural rhythms in saloon menus that reflected the agricultural and hunting cycles of frontier life, with spring bringing opportunities for fresh greens and early vegetables that provided welcome relief from the preserved foods that had sustained communities through winter months. Summer offering the peak variety of local produce, along with optimal conditions for food preservation activities like smoking meats and drying fruits. Autumn providing harvest opportunities and the need to prepare food stores for winter, and the cold months requiring reliance on preserved foods, while also offering opportunities for ice preservation in regions where winter temperatures dropped sufficiently to create natural refrigeration. The physical challenges of food preparation in frontier conditions included not only the obvious difficulties of working with primitive equipment and unpredictable fuel supplies, but also the problems created by dust, insects, extreme temperatures, and limited water supplies that affected every aspect of cooking and food storage, requiring cooks to develop creative solutions for protecting food from contamination, while working in environments that were far from ideal for maintaining the cleanliness and sanitation standards that we now know are essential for food safety. Though frontier cooks learned through experience to identify and avoid foods that had spoiled or become contaminated. Professional relationships between saloon operators and food suppliers evolved into complex networks that extended far beyond simple commercial transactions to include elements of credit, barter, mutual assistance, and social connection that were essential for survival in frontier communities, where formal banking and commercial institutions were often unavailable or unreliable, with successful saloon keepers maintaining relationships with ranchers, farmers, hunters, and traveling merchants who could provide essential ingredients in exchange for services, credit, or other forms of value that helped create the economic foundations necessary for community development. The development of distinctive regional cooking styles reflected the diverse cultural backgrounds of frontier settlers, combined with the practical constraints imposed by local environmental conditions and available ingredients, creating fusion cuisines that blended traditional European recipes with Mexican, Native American, and other influences while adapting to the limitations and opportunities presented by frontier conditions, resulting in dishes that were uniquely American while still maintaining connections to the various cultural traditions that had shaped their development through the practical experimentation and creative adaptation that characterized much of frontier life. Gender roles in frontier saloon food preparation were more fluid and complex than in more established communities, with women sometimes working as cooks, serving staff, or even proprietors despite the predominantly male culture of saloon society, while men often took responsibility for cooking duties that might have been considered women's work in other contexts, creating opportunities for both sexes to develop skills and assume responsibilities that challenged traditional gender expectations and contributed to the more egalitarian social structures that often characterized frontier communities, where survival depended more on practical competence than on conformity to established social conventions. The relationship between alcohol consumption and food service in frontier saloons was carefully managed by experienced proprietors who understood that properly fed customers were more likely to drink steadily throughout the evening, rather than becoming intoxicated quickly and causing disturbances that could damage the establishment's reputation and profitability, leading to the development of strategic food service practices that promoted sustained drinking while maintaining order and creating the kind of convivial atmosphere that encouraged customers to spend money freely while still behaving reasonably and returning for future visits. Education and knowledge transfer in frontier cooking took place through informal apprenticeships and practical experience rather than formal training programs, with aspiring cooks learning their skills by observing experienced practitioners, experimenting with available ingredients and techniques, and gradually developing the practical knowledge and intuitive judgment necessary for success under challenging conditions, creating a tradition of culinary knowledge that was passed down through direct mentorship and hands-on experience rather than written recipes or formal instruction, though this informal system was often effective at preserving and transmitting essential skills. The impact of mining booms on saloon food culture was dramatic, as the sudden influx of prospectors and miners into previously uninhabited regions created instant demand for food service that existing facilities were rarely equipped to handle, leading to rapid expansion of saloon operations and the importation of supplies and personnel from distant locations. While the boom and bust cycles that characterized mining communities created equally dramatic contractions that could leave saloon operators with excess inventory and equipment that had little value once the mineral resources were exhausted and the population moved on to new opportunities. Religious and moral reform movements that opposed saloon culture often focused as much on the social aspects of communal dining and entertainment as on alcohol consumption itself. Recognizing that saloons served important community functions that needed to be replaced if prohibition efforts were to succeed, leading to the development of alternative social institutions like churches, schools, and civic organizations that attempted to provide some of the same community services that saloons had offered, while promoting different moral and social values that reformers believed were more appropriate for civilized society. The evolution of frontier saloon cuisine reflected broader changes in American food culture during the 19th century, including the industrialization of food production, the development of national brands and standardized products, improvements in transportation and communication that connected remote communities to national markets, and changing consumer expectations that demanded greater variety, quality, and convenience in dining options. Transforming what had begun as simple survival-oriented food service into more sophisticated operations that competed for customers based on quality and variety rather than mere availability. Technological innovations in food preservation and preparation gradually transformed frontier saloon operations, with improvements in stove design providing better temperature control and fuel efficiency, the development of better storage containers and preservation methods, extending the shelf life of ingredients, and the introduction of labor-saving devices, reducing the time and effort required for food preparation. Though the adoption of these innovations was often slow due to the high costs of transportation to frontier locations and the conservative nature of operators who were reluctant to invest in untested equipment that might not work reliably under challenging conditions, the legacy of frontier saloon food culture extended far beyond the immediate historical period to influence the development of American restaurant culture, regional cuisines, and social customs surrounding food and hospitality that continue to shape contemporary dining experiences. With many of the informal, democratic traditions that characterized saloon dining rooms contributing to distinctively American approaches to restaurant service that emphasize efficiency, value, and accessibility rather than the more formal, hierarchical traditions that characterized European dining establishments and still influence fine dining culture in various forms today. International influences on frontier saloon cuisine came through the diverse backgrounds of immigrants who participated in westward expansion, bringing with them knowledge of traditional recipes, cooking techniques, and food preservation methods from their homelands, which were then adapted to work with available ingredients and local conditions, creating innovative fusion dishes that combined familiar flavors with new possibilities, while also introducing frontier communities to spices, preparations, and culinary concepts that would not otherwise have been available in remote locations far from established trade routes and cultural centers. The social significance of food sharing in frontier saloons extended beyond mere nutrition to encompass important cultural functions related to hospitality, community building, and the establishment of social bonds that were essential for survival and prosperity in challenging environments where cooperation and mutual assistance often meant the difference between success and failure. Creating traditions of generous hospitality and communal dining that became enduring elements of American culture and continue to influence contemporary attitudes toward food, entertainment, and social interaction in various forms and contexts. The practical challenges of maintaining adequate food supplies during extreme weather conditions required frontier saloon operators to develop sophisticated planning and storage strategies that could sustain operations through months of isolation when supply chains were interrupted by blizzards, floods, or other natural disasters, leading to the development of preservation techniques, inventory management systems, and emergency preparedness measures that often meant the difference between staying in business and being forced to close permanently when transportation was impossible and local food sources were inadequate to meet community needs. The transformation of Wild West saloons from simple drinking establishments to complex social institutions that provided food service, entertainment, business networking, and community gathering spaces reflected the evolution of frontier society from temporary, extractive camps focused on immediate survival to more permanent communities with diverse economic activities and social structures that required more sophisticated institutions and services to support their growing populations and increasingly complex social and economic relationships that characterize the maturation of frontier settlements into established towns and cities. In the end, the food served in Wild West saloons represented far more than simple sustenance for hungry customers, but rather embodied the resourcefulness, creativity, and adaptability that characterized the American frontier experience, providing tangible evidence of how ordinary people adapted to extraordinary circumstances while creating new cultural traditions and social institutions that would influence American society for generations to come, demonstrating that even the most basic human activities like eating and drinking could serve larger purposes when they brought diverse groups of people together in shared spaces, where individual survival depended on collective cooperation and mutual support in the ongoing adventure of building new communities and new ways of life in the vast wilderness of the American West. The art of smoke preservation became a cornerstone of frontier saloon food culture, with proprietors constructing elaborate smokehouses behind their establishments where large quantities of meat could be processed and preserved using techniques that had been refined over generations of necessity-driven innovation, creating distinctive flavors that became associated with frontier cuisine, while also providing reliable protein sources that could sustain communities through extended periods when fresh meat was unavailable. And the smoking process itself became a social activity that brought together community members who contributed their labor in exchange for shares of the preserved meat, creating cooperative systems that strengthened social bonds while ensuring that everyone had access to essential nutrition during challenging times. The role of trading posts and supply depots in supporting saloon food service created complex economic relationships that connected remote frontier establishments to national and international markets through networks of merchants, freighters, and middlemen who specialized in moving goods across vast distances under difficult conditions, with successful saloon operators learning to anticipate market fluctuations, seasonal availability patterns, and transportation delays that could affect both the cost and availability of essential ingredients, leading to sophisticated purchasing strategies that balanced immediate needs against long-term planning, while also maintaining sufficient cash flow to take advantage of unexpected opportunities when premium ingredients became available at favorable prices. Wild plants and foraged foods supplemented the diet in many frontier saloons, particularly during spring months when experienced cooks and local hunters could identify and harvest edible plants that provided fresh vegetables and medicinal properties after months of relying on preserved foods, with knowledge of local flora being passed down through informal networks that included Native American guides, experienced mountain men, and settlers who had learned through trial and error which plants were safe and nutritious. Though this practice required considerable expertise to avoid potentially dangerous mistakes that could result in poisoning or illness for customers who depended on the saloon for their primary nutrition. The development of standardized recipes and cooking procedures in frontier saloons was driven by practical necessity as much as culinary tradition, with successful establishments needing to ensure consistent quality and portion sizes that could satisfy customer expectations while maintaining predictable costs and preparation times, leading to the creation of written records and informal training programs that helped preserve culinary knowledge and techniques that might otherwise have been lost when experienced cooks moved on to other opportunities, or when establishments changed ownership, creating institutional memory that helped maintain food quality and customer satisfaction over time. Seasonal celebrations and community festivals provided opportunities for frontier saloons to showcase their finest culinary offerings, while also serving important social functions that strengthened community bonds and provided relief from the often harsh realities of frontier life, with special events like harvest celebrations, holiday feasts, and commemorative dinners requiring weeks of advanced preparation and coordination with local suppliers to obtain special ingredients and decorations that transformed ordinary saloon dining rooms into festive gathering spaces that could accommodate entire communities for shared meals and entertainment that created lasting memories and reinforced social connections. The influence of military provisioning systems on frontier saloon cuisine was significant, as many proprietors and cooks had served in various military campaigns and brought with them knowledge of large-scale food preparation techniques, supply chain management, and preservation methods that had been developed to feed armies in the field under challenging conditions. including standardized recipes that could be scaled up or down depending on the number of customers. Efficient cooking procedures that minimized fuel consumption and preparation time, and storage systems that maximized the use of available space while protecting food supplies from spoilage and contamination. Competition between saloons in established frontier towns often centered on food quality and variety, as much as on gambling opportunities and entertainment offerings, with successful establishments developing signature dishes and specialties that became local attractions and drew customers from surrounding areas, leading to innovations in menu planning, ingredient sourcing, and cooking techniques that gradually improved the overall standard of frontier cuisine, while also creating economic incentives for saloon operators to invest in better equipment, more skilled personnel, and higher quality ingredients that could differentiate their establishments from competitors and build lasting customer loyalty. The relationship between saloon food service and local agricultural development was symbiotic, with successful food establishments providing reliable markets for local farmers and ranchers, while also encouraging agricultural experimentation and diversification that could provide new ingredients and expand menu possibilities, creating economic relationships that supported the development of more diverse and stable local economies that were less dependent on extractive industries like mining and logging, which were subject to boom and bust cycles that could devastate communities when resources were exhausted or market conditions changed unfavorably. Nutritional knowledge in frontier saloon kitchens was largely empirical, based on practical experience and traditional wisdom, rather than scientific understanding of vitamins, minerals, and other dietary requirements. Yet experienced cooks often developed intuitively sound approaches to meal planning that provided balanced nutrition through the use of diverse ingredients and preparation methods that maximize the nutritional value of available foods, while also creating satisfying and flavorful meals that could sustain hard-working customers through demanding physical labor and harsh environmental conditions that required substantial caloric intake and robust constitution. The social hierarchy that existed within frontier saloon dining rooms was both more flexible and more complex than in established Eastern communities, with economic success often mattering more than family background or formal education, while shared hardships and common struggles created bonds that could transcend traditional social divisions, leading to dining environments where wealthy merchants might share tables with poor miners. Successful ranchers might exchange stories with traveling cowboys, and respected professionals might seek advice from experienced frontiersmen, creating democratic social spaces that embodied many of the egalitarian ideals that attracted settlers to the western frontier. Food-related superstitions and folk beliefs influenced frontier saloon cuisine in various ways, with cooks and customers maintaining traditions and practices that were believed to bring good luck, promote health, or prevent misfortune, including specific methods for preparing certain dishes, ingredients that were thought to have medicinal or protective properties, and timing considerations that connected food preparation and consumption to lunar cycles, seasonal changes, and other natural phenomena that were believed to affect the quality and effects of different foods, creating culinary traditions that blended practical knowledge with cultural beliefs and spiritual practices. The development of signature drinks and food combinations in frontier saloons created unique pairings that became associated with specific establishments and regions, with proprietors experimenting with local ingredients and customer preferences to develop offerings that could not be replicated elsewhere, including alcoholic beverages made from local fruits or grains, food preparations that incorporated regional spices or cooking techniques, and combination plates that reflected the cultural backgrounds and taste preferences of local customer bases, creating distinctive regional variations in frontier cuisine that contributed to the development of American regional food traditions. Labor organization in frontier saloon kitchens was necessarily flexible and informal, with tasks being divided based on availability, skill level, and immediate needs, rather than rigid job descriptions or hierarchical structures, leading to work environments where bartenders might help with food preparation during busy periods. Cooks might assist with serving customers when staff was short, and even customers might volunteer to help with simple tasks in exchange for meals or drinks, creating collaborative work cultures that emphasized practical competence and mutual assistance over formal authority structures and specialized roles. The impact of transportation improvements on frontier saloon cuisine was revolutionary, with the arrival of railroad connections dramatically expanding the variety and quality of ingredients that could be obtained, while also reducing costs and improving reliability of supply chains that had previously been subject to weather delays, mechanical failures, and other disruptions that could leave establishments without essential supplies for extended periods, leading to menu expansions, quality improvements, and increased customer expectations that transformed frontier dining from survival-oriented sustenance into more sophisticated culinary experiences that competed with dining options in established eastern cities. Waste management in frontier saloons required creative solutions for disposing of food scraps, cooking byproducts, and other organic waste in communities that lacked organized sanitation systems and were concerned about attracting unwanted animals or creating health hazards, leading to the development of composting systems, animal feeding programs, and other waste reduction strategies that minimized environmental impact while also providing valuable resources for local agricultural activities, demonstrating the circular economy principles that were essential for sustainability in resource-limited frontier environments where efficiency and conservation were matters of economic and environmental necessity. The preservation of cultural food traditions among immigrant communities in frontier towns was often centered around saloon kitchens, where ethnic groups could maintain connections to their heritage through familiar flavors and preparation methods, even when traditional ingredients were unavailable or prohibitively expensive, leading to creative adaptations that substituted local ingredients for traditional ones, while maintaining the essential character and cultural significance of ancestral dishes, creating new fusion cuisines that honored cultural heritage while adapting to frontier conditions and available resources. Emergency food distribution during natural disasters, economic hardships, or other community crises often centered around saloon kitchens that had the equipment, supplies, and organizational capacity to prepare and serve large quantities of food to community members in need, with saloon proprietors frequently taking leadership roles in coordinating relief efforts and providing essential services that helped communities survive and recover from catastrophic events, demonstrating the important civic function that these establishments served beyond their commercial activities, and highlighting their role as essential community institutions. The evolution of customer service practices in frontier saloons reflected both the practical constraints of operating under challenging conditions and the democratic social values that characterized frontier society, with service styles that emphasized efficiency and informality over elaborate protocols and hierarchical distinctions, creating dining environments that were accessible to customers from all social backgrounds, while maintaining reasonable standards of cleanliness and quality that met community expectations and supported business success in competitive markets, where customer satisfaction was essential for long-term viability. Seasonal employment patterns in frontier saloons created opportunities for specialized food service workers who might travel from establishment to establishment following predictable patterns of business activity, with experienced cooks, bakers, and food service personnel developing circuits that allowed them to work in mining camps during boom periods, cattle towns during shipping seasons, and agricultural communities during harvest times, creating a mobile workforce of food service professionals who contributed to the standardization and improvement of frontier cuisine, while also spreading innovations and best practices across wide geographic areas. The relationship between frontier saloon food culture and the development of American industrial food production was significant, with the practical innovations and market demands that emerged from frontier dining experiences contributing to the development of canning industries, meat packing operations, flour milling facilities, and other food processing businesses that would eventually transform American agriculture and food distribution, demonstrating how frontier experiences influenced national economic development and contributed to the creation of modern American food systems that continue to shape contemporary dining experiences and agricultural practices. In this way, the simple meals served in dusty frontier saloons played an unexpectedly important role in the broader story of American cultural and economic development, providing practical laboratories where innovative cooking techniques were developed, diverse cultural traditions were blended and adapted, and new social institutions were created that would influence American society long after the frontier period had ended, showing how even the most basic human activities like eating and drinking could serve larger historical purposes when they brought people together in shared spaces, where individual creativity and collective cooperation combined to create new possibilities for community life, economic development, and cultural expression that embodied the spirit of innovation, adaptability, and democratic equality that characterized the American frontier experience and continues to influence American culture and identity today. The integration of Mexican and Spanish culinary traditions into frontier saloon cuisine created some of the most distinctive and enduring contributions to American regional cooking, with ingredients like chili peppers, corn masa, beans prepared in new ways, and spices that had been unknown to most Anglo settlers gradually finding their way onto saloon tables throughout the Southwest and beyond, often through the influence of Mexican vaqueros, traders, and settlers who shared their knowledge and techniques with Anglo proprietors and cooks who recognized the superior flavor and nutritional value of these traditional preparations, leading to the development of hybrid dishes that combined European, Mexican, and Native American elements into new forms of frontier cuisine that would eventually influence national food culture. The economics of fuel consumption in frontier saloon kitchens required careful management of scarce wood resources that often had to be hauled from distant sources at considerable expense, leading to cooking techniques that maximized heat efficiency and minimized waste, with experienced cooks learning to manage fires that could provide consistent heat for extended periods while consuming minimal fuel, using techniques like banking coals for slow cooking, timing multiple dishes to cook together, and utilizing residual heat for bread baking and other secondary cooking tasks that made the most effective use of every piece of wood that was burned in the perpetual struggle to balance operational costs against customer satisfaction and business profitability. The development of distinctive regional barbecue traditions had significant roots in frontier saloon culture, where the necessity of cooking large quantities of tough meat using available wood and outdoor cooking spaces led to innovations in smoking techniques, seasoning combinations, and slow cooking methods that could transform cheap cuts of beef, pork, and game into tender, flavorful dishes that became signature offerings at establishments throughout Texas, Kansas, Missouri, and other frontier regions, with each area developing its own characteristic approaches to meat preparation, sauce recipes, and serving styles that reflected local ingredients, cultural influences, and customer preferences. Professional relationships between traveling salesmen and frontier saloon operators created important channels for the introduction of new products, cooking techniques, and business practices that helped improve the quality and variety of food service, while also connecting remote establishments to broader commercial networks that could provide access to specialty ingredients, equipment, and market information that might not otherwise have been available. With successful salesmen often serving as informal consultants who shared knowledge about successful operations they had visited, while also identifying opportunities for product innovations that could meet the specific needs of frontier food service establishments. The role of credit and barter systems in frontier saloon food procurement was essential for operations in communities where cash was often scarce and formal banking systems were unavailable, with proprietors developing complex networks of reciprocal relationships that allowed them to obtain necessary supplies through exchanges of services, commodities, or promises of future payment. creating economic arrangements that helped stabilize food supplies while also strengthening community bonds and creating mutual dependencies that contributed to the overall resilience and sustainability of frontier settlements during periods of economic uncertainty or external threats. Seasonal variations in customer populations created significant challenges for frontier saloon food service planning, with establishments in mining areas experiencing dramatic fluctuations as prospectors arrived for seasonal work or moved on to new opportunities. Cattle towns seeing massive influxes during shipping seasons, followed by quiet periods with minimal business, and agricultural communities having their own cycles of activity that corresponded to planting, cultivation, and harvest schedules, requiring flexible operations that could scale up or down quickly, while maintaining food quality and controlling costs during both busy and slow periods. The influence of chuck wagon cooking traditions on saloon cuisine was substantial, with many cooks having learned their skills on cattle drives, where they had mastered the art of preparing satisfying meals for large groups using portable equipment and preserved ingredients, bringing to saloon kitchens a repertoire of recipes and techniques that had been tested under demanding conditions and proven effective for feeding hungry working men, including methods for preparing beans, biscuits, coffee, and meat dishes that could be produced consistently using simple equipment and readily available ingredients. Food safety practices in frontier saloons were necessarily pragmatic rather than scientific, with cooks relying on sensory evaluation, traditional wisdom, and hard-earned experience to identify spoiled or contaminated ingredients, while developing preparation and storage methods that minimize the risk of foodborne illness within the constraints of their technological and knowledge limitations, leading to practices that were often surprisingly effective despite the lack of refrigeration, thermometers, and other modern food safety tools that we now consider essential for safe food service operations. The social rituals surrounding communal meals in frontier saloons served important functions beyond simple nutrition, creating structured opportunities for information exchange, business networking, conflict resolution, and community building that were essential for the functioning of frontier society. With shared tables and informal dining protocols, facilitating conversations between strangers while also reinforcing social norms and cultural values that helped maintain order and cooperation in communities where formal institutions for governance and social control were often weak or non-existent. Innovation in food preservation techniques was driven by necessity in frontier saloons, where proprietors and cooks experimented with various methods for extending the shelf life of perishable ingredients, including the use of natural refrigeration from springs, caves, and ice when available, the development of improved smoking and curing processes, and the creative application of salt, vinegar, and other preservatives to prevent spoilage while maintaining palatability, leading to techniques that were often more effective than traditional methods and contributed to the overall advancement of food preservation knowledge. The relationship between frontier saloon food culture and the development of American whiskey culture was intimate and reciprocal, with food service influencing drinking patterns, while alcohol production provided ingredients and flavoring agents that were incorporated into cooking, creating culinary traditions that paired specific dishes with particular types of alcohol, while also developing cooking techniques that used whiskey, beer, and other alcoholic beverages as ingredients in stews, marinades, and other preparations that added complexity and flavor, while also serving practical functions in food preservation and preparation. Educational opportunities for aspiring cooks in frontier saloons were largely informal, but often quite comprehensive, with experienced practitioners passing on their knowledge through apprenticeships and mentoring relationships that covered not only cooking techniques, but also business practices, customer relations, supply management, and the practical skills necessary for success in the challenging environment of frontier food service, creating a tradition of knowledge transfer that helped maintain and improve standards, while also fostering innovation and adaptation to changing conditions and opportunities. The impact of seasonal weather patterns on frontier saloon operations extended beyond simple supply chain considerations to affect every aspect of food service, from menu planning and ingredient storage to customer comfort and business volume, with successful operations developing strategies for adapting to extreme temperatures, managing humidity levels that affected food preservation, dealing with dust and other environmental challenges that threatened food quality, and maintaining operations during severe weather events that could isolate communities for extended periods. Cultural celebrations and ethnic festivals in frontier towns often centered around saloon kitchens that had the capacity and expertise to prepare traditional foods for large groups, creating opportunities for different cultural communities to share their heritage while also introducing other residents to new flavors and cooking techniques, leading to cultural exchange and culinary fusion that enriched the food culture of frontier communities, while also strengthening social bonds between different ethnic groups and contributing to the development of distinctive regional cuisines. The evolution of portion sizes and meal structures in frontier saloons reflected both practical considerations about food costs and availability and cultural expectations about appropriate hospitality and value, with successful establishments learning to balance generous serving sizes that satisfied hard-working customers against reasonable food costs that maintained profitability, while also adapting meal timing and composition to match the work schedules and dietary needs of their primary customer base, creating dining traditions that emphasized substance and value over formal presentation or elaborate preparation. Transportation of live animals for fresh meat represented a significant challenge for frontier saloons that wanted to provide higher quality protein than was available through preserved meat sources, with some establishments maintaining relationships with local ranchers or drovers who could supply cattle, pigs, or other animals that could be slaughtered as needed. Though this approach required facilities for housing and caring for animals as well as skills in butchering and meat processing that not all saloon operators possessed, making fresh meat a luxury that was not always available even in establishments that could afford to purchase it. The development of signature sauces and condiments in frontier saloons created opportunities for differentiation and customer loyalty, while also providing ways to enhance the flavor of simple ingredients and mask any defects in food quality that might result from storage problems or ingredient limitations, with successful establishments developing proprietary recipes for barbecue sauces, pickle preparations, and other condiments that became closely guarded secrets and important competitive advantages that could attract customers and generate repeat business based on unique flavors that could not be replicated elsewhere. Cooperation between saloons and other local businesses created informal networks of mutual support that helped strengthen entire frontier communities, while also improving food service options through resource sharing and coordinated purchasing that could achieve better prices and more reliable supply chains than any single establishment could manage independently, with successful collaborations including shared storage facilities, coordinated purchasing agreements, and reciprocal arrangements for sharing scarce resources during emergencies or periods of high demand that exceeded individual capacity. The legacy of frontier saloon food culture can be traced through the development of American restaurant chains, fast food concepts, and casual dining establishments that inherited many of the practical approaches to food service that had been developed under frontier conditions, including emphasis on efficiency, standardized preparation methods, generous portions, and informal service styles that prioritized accessibility and value over formal presentation, demonstrating how innovations developed under extreme conditions could influence mainstream food culture and contribute to distinctive American approaches to commercial food service that continue to characterize contemporary dining experiences. In the final analysis, the food served in Wild West saloons represented far more than simple sustenance for hungry customers, but rather embodied a comprehensive response to the challenges of creating community life under frontier conditions, demonstrating how human ingenuity, cultural adaptation, and cooperative effort could transform basic survival needs into opportunities for social connection, economic development, and cultural innovation that contributed to the broader American story of westward expansion and democratic community building, while also creating culinary traditions and social institutions that would influence American food culture and social customs for generations to come, proving that even the most humble meals shared in rough frontier establishments could serve larger purposes in the great adventure of building new communities and new ways of life in the vast wilderness of the American West, where individual survival depended on collective cooperation, and where the simple act of sharing food became a foundation for the complex social relationships and cultural institutions that would eventually transform a harsh frontier into the foundation of modern American civilization. The management of food inventories in frontier saloons required sophisticated planning and record-keeping systems that could track the consumption of dozens of different ingredients while anticipating future needs based on seasonal patterns, customer fluctuations, and supply chain reliability, with successful proprietors developing detailed knowledge of how long different preserved foods would last under various storage conditions, which suppliers could be trusted to deliver quality products on schedule, and how to balance inventory levels that were sufficient to prevent shortages without tying up excessive capital in perishable goods that might spoil before they could be used, creating business practices that combined practical experience with careful observation and record keeping that would have impressed modern supply chain managers. The adaptation of traditional European baking techniques to frontier conditions created unique challenges and innovations in saloon kitchens, where bakers needed to work with inconsistent flour quality, unreliable yeast supplies, and wood-fired ovens that provided uneven heat distribution and required constant attention to maintain proper temperatures, leading to the development of modified recipes and techniques that could produce acceptable bread, biscuits, and other baked goods despite these limitations, while also creating opportunities for bakers who could master these challenging conditions to develop reputations for excellence that could attract customers from considerable distances and provide competitive advantages for the establishments they served. The role of children in frontier saloon food culture was complex and varied, with some establishments welcoming families during meal times while maintaining adults-only policies during evening entertainment hours, creating environments where children could experience the social aspects of communal dining while being protected from the gambling, drinking, and other activities that were considered inappropriate for young people. And in some cases, children of proprietors or employees would help with simple food preparation tasks, learning valuable skills while contributing to family business operations that required all available labor to remain profitable and competitive. Medicinal applications of food and drink in frontier saloons reflected both traditional folk medicine practices and practical responses to the health challenges of frontier life, with proprietors often stocking ingredients that were believed to have therapeutic properties and offering preparations that were promoted as much for their health benefits as for their taste, including various tonics, herbal teas, and food combinations that were thought to prevent or treat common ailments like scurvy, digestive problems, and respiratory conditions that were prevalent in frontier communities where medical care was often unavailable or ineffective. The development of efficient dishwashing and cleanup procedures in frontier saloons was essential for maintaining sanitary conditions and customer satisfaction, while minimizing labor costs and water usage, leading to systematic approaches that maximize the effectiveness of limited cleaning supplies, while ensuring that plates, cups, and utensils were adequately cleaned between uses. Though the standards and methods employed were necessarily different from modern practices and relied heavily on hot water, soap when available, and manual scrubbing that required significant time and effort from staff, who also had other responsibilities related to food preparation and customer service. Competition for skilled food service workers in frontier communities often led to innovations in employment practices and worker compensation that were ahead of their time in recognizing the value of experienced personnel, with successful saloons offering competitive wages, providing room and board, and creating working conditions that could attract and retain talented cooks and servers who had numerous employment options in communities where good food service was essential for business success, leading to employment practices that emphasized worker satisfaction and retention as key components of overall business strategy. The influence of military mess hall procedures on frontier saloon operations was significant, as many proprietors and workers had experience with large-scale food service in military contexts and brought with them knowledge of efficient preparation methods, portion control systems, and logistical approaches that could be adapted to civilian operations, including techniques for managing food supplies, coordinating meal service for large groups, and maintaining equipment under challenging conditions that proved valuable in frontier establishments that faced similar challenges of scale, resource limitations, and operational efficiency. Seasonal hunting and gathering activities provided important supplements to saloon food supplies, with proprietors and employees often participating in community hunting expeditions or organizing their own food procurement activities that could provide fresh meat, fish, wild plants, and other ingredients that added variety to menus while reducing dependence on expensive purchased supplies. Creating seasonal rhythms of food procurement that connected saloon operations to natural cycles and local ecosystems, while also providing opportunities for community cooperation and shared labor that strengthened social bonds. The development of regional reputation and brand identity among frontier saloons often centered around distinctive food offerings that became associated with specific establishments, with successful proprietors cultivating reputations for particular dishes, ingredients, or cooking styles that could attract customers from wide areas and create competitive advantages that were difficult for competitors to replicate, leading to early forms of restaurant marketing and brand development that recognized the importance of consistent quality and distinctive offerings in building customer loyalty and business success. Storage and preservation challenges unique to different frontier environments required adaptive solutions that reflected local climate conditions, available materials, and specific threats to food quality, with saloons in desert regions developing different approaches than those in mountain areas, coastal establishments facing different challenges than those in prairie locations, and operations in different seasons requiring modifications to basic preservation and storage techniques that could maintain food quality despite environmental extremes that would challenge even modern preservation methods. The integration of gambling and food service in many frontier saloons created unique operational challenges and opportunities, with proprietors needing to balance the requirements of food preparation and service against the demands of managing gaming activities, while also recognizing that well-fed customers were often better gamblers who would play longer and spend more money, leading to strategic approaches that used food service as a tool for enhancing gambling revenue, while also ensuring that both aspects of the business operation maintained acceptable standards of quality and customer satisfaction. Cultural dietary restrictions and preferences among diverse frontier populations required flexibility and accommodation from saloon operators who needed to serve customers from various ethnic and religious backgrounds, leading to menu adaptations and preparation methods that could accommodate different dietary requirements while still maintaining operational efficiency and cost control, creating opportunities for cultural exchange and culinary innovation that enriched frontier food culture, while also demonstrating the practical tolerance and adaptability that were essential for business success in diverse frontier communities. The role of credit and debt in frontier food service created complex financial relationships between saloon proprietors and their customers, suppliers, and employees, with successful operations requiring sophisticated understanding of cash flow management, credit evaluation, and debt collection that could maintain business viability, while also preserving the customer relationships that were essential for long-term success, leading to business practices that balanced financial prudence with community cooperation and customer loyalty in ways that reflected the social and economic realities of frontier life. Innovation in cooking equipment and kitchen organization within the constraints of frontier technology led to creative solutions that maximized efficiency and functionality while working with basic tools and materials, with experienced cooks developing modified techniques and improvised equipment that could achieve results comparable to more sophisticated Eastern establishments, despite significant technological limitations, creating practical innovations that demonstrated human ingenuity and adaptability, while contributing to the development of distinctively American approaches to commercial food preparation. The transformation of frontier saloons from simple drinking establishments to complex social institutions that provided comprehensive food service, entertainment, and community gathering spaces reflected the evolution of frontier society from temporary extraction-based camps to permanent communities with diverse economic activities and social structures, demonstrating how businesses that began with simple survival-oriented services could evolve to meet increasingly sophisticated community needs while maintaining their essential character and continuing to serve important social and economic functions that supported community development and cultural continuity. The seasonal migration patterns of workers in extractive industries created predictable fluctuations in customer base that required flexible operations capable of scaling up during boom periods while maintaining viability during slower times, with successful saloons developing strategies for managing these cycles through inventory adjustment, staff flexibility, and service modifications that could accommodate dramatic changes in business volume, while maintaining food quality and customer satisfaction throughout periods of both intense activity and relative quiet that characterize the economic rhythms of frontier communities. The relationship between frontier saloon food culture and the development of American agricultural practices was reciprocal, with saloon demand influencing local farming decisions, while agricultural innovations affected menu possibilities and ingredient availability, creating market relationships that encouraged agricultural diversification and experimentation, while also providing farmers with reliable local markets that could support more stable and prosperous rural communities, demonstrating how food service businesses could contribute to broader economic development and agricultural innovation that benefited entire regions. Water quality and availability issues affected every aspect of frontier saloon food service, from cooking and cleaning to beverage preparation and customer comfort, with establishments in different locations developing various strategies for obtaining, storing, and treating water supplies that could meet operational needs while ensuring reasonable quality and safety, leading to innovations in water management and treatment that were often more advanced than those used in established Eastern communities, and reflected the practical problem-solving skills that characterized frontier life. The legacy of frontier saloon food culture in contemporary American dining includes not only specific dishes and preparation techniques that have survived and evolved, but also broader approaches to hospitality, service, and food culture that emphasize accessibility, informality, and democratic values that continue to distinguish American dining from European traditions, demonstrating how innovations developed under frontier conditions could influence national culture and contribute to distinctively American approaches to food, hospitality, and social interaction that remain important elements of contemporary American cultural identity. In this comprehensive examination of frontier saloon food culture, we can see how the simple necessity of feeding hungry customers in challenging conditions led to innovations, adaptations, and cultural developments that extended far beyond the immediate requirements of survival, creating social institutions, culinary traditions, and business practices that would influence American culture for generations, while also demonstrating the remarkable human capacity for creativity, adaptation, and community building under even the most challenging circumstances, proving that the story of what people ate in Wild West saloons is ultimately a story about how ordinary people created extraordinary communities and cultural achievements through cooperation, innovation, and the simple but profound act of sharing food in spaces that brought diverse groups together in pursuit of common goals and mutual survival in the great adventure of American westward expansion.